Hello friends, I'm Michael Kingswood. I write fiction for fun and profit. Before we get to today's show, we have to do one thing real quick, and that's a little spot from our sponsor. Fortunately enough, our sponsor is me. In a world of valor and magic, two soldiers flee from their past. An isolated mountain town suffers under the heel of a vicious band of brigands. An offer of redemption for the one, salvation for the other, but not without great risk to both. Action and adventure await in Glimmer Vale, the first book of the Glimmer Vale Chronicles. Get your copy today, wherever great books are sold. Hey friends, so it is Saturday. It is Story Saturday, which means we are continuing to read stories from my big project last year. Volume 2 of which, 5 volumes of stories that we wrote last year. Volume 2 we are reading through now. This is the third story from Volume 2, is what we're doing today. It's a little different from a lot of things I normally do. It's called Sly's Raiders, and it is about cats. Now, I don't like cats. I'm a little perturbed because I've recently had to accept a cat intrusion into my life for a bit. But I don't like cats. Fortunately, it was only a temporary intrusion. I couldn't deal with it otherwise. I don't like cats. But it's also a cliche that writers have to write stories about cats. And for whatever reason, during this project that I did last year, I decided that, hey, I guess I'll do a story with cats. But I'm making it cool. So it's cat commandos going on a raid to rescue some prisoners. So let's get into that. I wrote it. I'm reading it. It's cool. You will like it. See you on the other side. Felix sat down on his haunches atop the rooftop, overlooking this night's target, and narrowed his eyes. It was a long, low structure, 2 stories tall and stretching almost half of the city block that housed it. Blocky, unattractive, it screamed warehouse, even if the signage out front, written in human script, which Felix couldn't read, though he knew what it said, hadn't advertised this place quite clearly. Mei Ling's Asian Supplies Incorporated. Felix's whiskers rose on his cheeks and the hair on his head stood on end for a moment as he considered the atrocities committed there, and he felt the urge to pop his claws and slit some throats. Beside him, Sly stirred and cast a withering eye his way. Just the one eye, but that was the only one he had, and it was enough. Felix settled back, forcing himself to relax, and felt Sly's eye on him for a long moment. Then he looked away, and Felix let out a long, slow, relaxing breath. He had faced duels and challenges, battle and hardship, but nothing compared with the judgment of Sly's stare, given in rebuke. The night air was damp, retaining the warmth of the day, even as the sun departed and heat wanted to leave with it. Yet Felix felt that remainder of the day distinctly as he went back to watching the target building and forcing himself to refrain from licking away the damp uncleanness that seemed to settle into his very bones as the night grew steadily darker. It was an effort to restrain that impulse, but after Sly's attention, and especially in light of Sly's adamant refusal to bend to any impulse toward grooming, anything except watchful alertness as he waited for his scout to return, Felix found little difficulty in putting forth that effort. The orange-pink in the western sky gradually faded into blue-black, and the sounds of the human traffic in the city all around slowed and dimmed, becoming more and more infrequent, despite the ever-present streetlights they had erected all around. It was a gradual process, and yet also surprising when Felix came to see a shape moving out of the near blackness in front of and below him, Sly and the others in his squad. Almost he wanted to pop claw and pounce atop the interloper, but he heard Sly's near-silent hiss, which, though quiet, still carried through to Felix's ears, and those of the others to his left, like an arrow shot from a longbow. That hiss pressed him to stillness, and a moment later he saw that Sly had been correct in his assessment, as Thomas slinked into view. Though a tabby, Thomas was the stealthiest of everyone in the squad. Felix shouldn't have been surprised about not being able to recognize him, and yet, somehow, he always was. Thomas flicked careless eyes Felix's way as he slid up the roof before Sly, and Felix felt that casual dismissal, the notion that, though Felix was more than his equal in mass and strength, Thomas was still his superior. And Felix had to suppress the instinctive urge to rise to the unspoken challenge to put the usurper down. His emotions wanted to rise up and embrace the challenge, but long years of training made suppression of that impulse, if not easy, at least second nature. That was the way of the canine, but worse, the undisciplined, untrained canine. Felix and his brethren were far above them. "Report," Sly said, when Thomas stepped up in front of him. In the dimness of night, Thomas was dark, nearly black except for a streak of white beneath his chin going down to his breast. It was the sort of deformation that could have, maybe should have, disqualified him from ranger duty, if he wasn't so damn good at blending into his surroundings in spite of, or maybe because of it. Thomas flicked his tongue over his teeth, and stretched languidly for a moment that halted noticeably beneath Sly's imperious gaze. Midway through his act, Thomas seemed to perch between one motion and the next briefly, then he went to relaxed attention and swiped at his snout in a mild approximation of a salute. "The last of the humans have departed. The ingress point is open, as the informant said it would be." "Excellent," Sly said in reply, apparently deciding to ignore Thomas's impertinence. Whether entirely, or until it could be addressed later in a more private setting, Felix would not wager to guess. At Sly's take station, Thomas padded away to Felix's left, stopping at the far end of the row of 5 that waited on Sly's command. One and all, each of the squad had endured the most harrowing training, survived the most demanding of torments, all toward this night's end, the vengeance finally ready to unleash, the justice finally to obtain. Like the others Felix had dreamt of, worked for, this time. He could practically taste it, wanted nothing more than to bound across the space between their perch and the targets, and yet he knew he could not give way to those base impulses. He must focus it, hone it into the weapon that would do his people the most good. Still, it was an effort to refrain. To his left, he felt that effort amongst his brethren. Only Sly's commanding stare, harsh and strong as he left the position he had taken to Felix's right as they waited Thomas's report, and strode slowly in front of the ranks under his command, held Felix and his fellows in their place. That, and years of stern training. But despite that training, had Sly not been there? In the dim glow of the human streetlights below and to the left of them, Sly's form was darkness itself interspersed with patches of white. His legs coiled strength, ready to unleash, his tail swirling with controlled energy, ready to unleash at a moment's notice. His right ear was clipped, hacked away in a battle long ago, lost into history. A puffed scar crossed over that same side of his face, creasing eyebrow and cheek, leaving a place that fur would no longer grow. The eye was completely white, rendered useless in the same duel that had left the scar. A vicious scar, yes, but the Rottweiler who had given it was no longer for this world, nor were his 2 companions. As Sly's stare slipped over Felix, it seemed to linger for a moment as though judging him, and he had to force himself to a greater position of attention. He felt relief when it passed on to the others, and understanding when each of them stiffened just as he had done. No one wanted to cross Sly. To cross him was to cross legend itself. Might as well challenge Bast. She might at least show some mercy. Sly would not. "All right, gentlemen," Sly said as he stalked down the line of Felix's fellow rangers. "This is it. Tonight we strike the opening blow in our people's campaign of liberation. You know what we face here. There's a good chance most of us won't come back, but if we are successful, we will save dozens of our imprisoned kin. All across the continent, others are making strikes like ours, and tomorrow the main offensive starts." Sly paused, flicking his one good eye up and down the line. When it crossed over Felix, he felt an electric jolt go down his spine. "Make your fathers proud tonight." With that, Sly turned and bounded across the rooftop and downward, toward the stone wall that ran adjacent to their building, and which ran toward Mei Ling's warehouse. Felix didn't hear the silent roar from the other rangers to his left, of course not, but the tide of emotion carried him along behind Sly as he led the way. As Felix's paws slipped across the rooftop, as he followed his leader, he almost understood the canine instinct to howl with delight. Almost. The ingress point was at the corner of the warehouse where the stone wall ran up to it, a glass window that had been left ajar so that its bottom was leaning out, beckoning toward one nimble enough to hop into it. Intelligence from an informer in the corporation had revealed that the humans had left several windows open similarly around the top of the building. The assumption while planning this operation had been that they would do the same tonight. But as Sly liked to say, assuming makes an ass out of you and me, so it fell to Thomas to verify the route lay open as advertised. Now Felix followed his leader as he bounded smoothly from the wall into the narrow gap between the window frame and the building side. Then he landed smoothly atop a tall shelf on the inside wall of the warehouse. Sly was there off to the left and gestured with his head for Felix to keep on going, so he bounded past his leader and down to the top of an adjacent shelf. Then he waited, while the remaining 5 members of the squad followed after. The interior warehouse was dim, nearly black. The humans had long since gone home for the night and had extinguished all their lighting. So all that could be seen in normal spectrums were half a dozen rows of shelves running parallel to the wall housing Felix's squad's ingress route, and then a wide open space interspersed with tables, spaces to allow room for access between them, and rolling doors for trucks on the left-hand side of the wall. It all seemed nice and comfy, a standard business setup, except Felix knew what the canines had buried beneath it all. "All right, let's go," Sly said from behind Felix and to his right. "Switch to infrared and look sharp." Felix didn't look back at his leader. Sly would have already begun his search forward toward the target anyway, but he did take a moment to readjust his vision. He could see in what the humans called visible light, of course, but also into the infrared. Normally he observed a mix of the two, but in the dimness of the warehouse normal visible light would be virtually useless, so with a brief force of effort, Felix shifted his attention away from that toward the heat spectrum. The space didn't exactly spring into view, it had always been visible, but as he focused in on the infrared more, things that were obscure sprang into focus, and he found himself able to bound across the gaps between shelves without any effort. So easy was it to pick out the right landing area to the target. And then, descending the shelves to the floor and scampering across the room to the far side where the wall appeared unbroken under normal light, also became child's play. The target was halfway down the wall to the left, toward the rolled-up doors that human trucks would utilize. But this was no human doorway. In fact, to the humans it wouldn't look like much at all. Just a piece of their equipment designed to do some arcane piece of work that Felix didn't know or care about, sitting up against the wall. Because that's what it was. But the canines, or they and their allies, had installed a hidden doorway to their lair adjacent to and below that pile of equipment. To the humans, it was just a slightly discolored patch of wall, the same on this side of the gear as it was on the other, but in the infrared, the door stood out plainly. As did the writing, in canine script above the door. Felix could read canine, and reading the message there made his claws slide out of their own accord. "The only good cat is General Tso's chicken." Felix slid to a halt in front of the door, next to a cat who had gotten there in front of him, one whose back hair was standing up straight and who appeared coiled for combat, and for a second he didn't recognize Sly. Sly, who was always calm, cool, composed, and yet ready for deadly action at a moment's notice. Sly, who would never dream of letting his anger, or his fear, show through. And yet here he was, wrath on display for all to see. For a moment, as he stopped beside his leader, Felix could only gape in astonishment. Sly seemed to sense it and looked over at him, fixing him beneath the gaze of his sole remaining eye, as though shining a spotlight on him. After a moment, Sly merely nodded. "It's been a long time coming." Felix swallowed, then flicked his tongue over his front teeth, suddenly uncertain for a moment. Then Sly looked past him toward Jerry, the locksmith of their company. "Pick it," and Jerry swept forward toward the door. Moments later he had it open, and Sly led the squad within. Felix had imagined what a place like this would resemble, but the reality went far beyond his wildest imaginings. First was the mechanical apparatus. It lay to the left as they emerged from the door, lining up nicely with the equipment on the human side of the wall. It must be all one piece of gear, but how it lined up, or why, was beyond Felix. But it was obvious what the machinery was designed to do. There was still evidence at the far end, splatters of color that would be red under normal light, but that still shone slightly in the infrared. Blood smears from where the butchering had been done. Then cutters and separators and skinners and bundlers, a mechanized monstrosity that rendered a previously living and capable member of Felix's brethren into mere meat, and packaged that meat into neat packs that were delivered past the wall into the warehouse to be stored and then shipped to markets and restaurants all over the metropolitan area. All so humans could enjoy the best of, quote, Asian, unquote, cuisine. Like real Asians would eat Felix and his kin, never in a million years, not when there were canines freely available. As Felix looked over the monstrosity, he felt bile rising in his belly past anything he had ever experienced, so strong he almost didn't notice the rest of the room. But only for a moment. The noise started almost as soon as he entered, and rose in pitch as the remaining members of his squad followed, forming an arc along the wall adjacent to the machine. Scrambling and the sounds of claws striking against metal from the opposite side of this room from the place he and his fellows had entered, and as Felix looked over there he saw row upon row of cages stretching almost to the ceiling. Cages that were barely large enough for a cat to sit up in, let alone stretch or get comfortable, stacked one atop another, built into the opposite wall itself, and full, at least 2/3 of the way, with his kin. Shut up, imprisoned, and tormented as they must have seen the grisly fate waiting for them as the canines and their helpers fed one cat after another into the monstrous machinery of slaughter that none in the cages could hope to look away from. The bile had only felt like it was flowing before. Felix had to avoid vomiting as he considered the hell his imprisoned people here must have been living through, and how many had not lived through it. Let's, he began to say. Then another sound penetrated his consciousness. It had been there all along, beneath the rattling in the cages, but he hadn't registered it at first. Now it was growing, and from all sides except from behind him, a low, guttural growl, getting louder and more insistent by the second. Felix forced his eyes away from the stacked cages and back toward the floor of the room. Sweeping left and right, he saw low, furry forms advancing toward him and his squad from all directions. 4, 6, 8. Small, wiry bodies with straight white and black hair that made them look half again as large as they really were. Growls that rolled from their throats like constrained lumber, ready to burst forth with fury. Short but sharp teeth that were bared with menace as they advanced. "Shih Tzus!" exclaimed Jerry, to Felix's left. No sooner had he said it than the guardian canine, small but powerful, surged forward to the attack like a swarming wave that would break over the mightiest of dams. The world became a blur of thrashing fur, arcing claws and fangs, dancing feints and darting advances, shrieks and cries of aggression and chagrin, victory and pain, as canine and feline struck together and fought. Felix lost himself in the mighty chaos of it. One moment he was swiping his claws at the bared throat of a Shih Tzu, the next it had bounded away and he found himself batted aside by a headbutt from its comrade. One of Felix's fellows bellowed out in pain and staggered, his hamstrings severed by a Shih Tzu bite. Then a canine fell on his side, its belly ripped open by one of Felix's fellow's claws so that its intestines were beginning to spill out. Felix only thought he had felt sickened by bile moments earlier, but then he had no time to process the twin horrors he had just seen as a white and black shape crashed into him from the left and he went tumbling. He landed on his feet, of course, only to find that the guardian canine who had accosted him had as well. It was smaller than him, but not by much, and from the ferocious way it glared at him, teeth bared, it wouldn't have cared if he was twice its size. Thrice. Felix swallowed and fully extended his claws, then took a step forward toward his new foe. The Shih Tzu advanced as well. Then a black and white bundle of legs and tail and claws and aggression fell on the canine from Felix's right, and he halted for a moment, stunned. When Sly rose from the Shih Tzu's prostrate form, he was stained red in half a dozen places. But if any of those stains came from his own blood, Sly didn't show it. He withdrew from the canine that had just a moment ago been threatening Felix, and his claws were dripping red. Fresh red that glowed in the infrared. Felix looked from Sly's claws up to his leader's face and found Sly's one eye, ice cold and passionless, focusing in on him. "You okay?" Felix nodded. Before he could even get the word out, Sly was moving again to Felix's left. He turned his head and saw a duo of Shih Tzus, who had apparently been advancing but who were now still, watching as Sly advanced toward them with eyes that were openly wary, perhaps even fearful. "Find the controls of the cages," Sly said. He spared Felix just the briefest of glances again before advancing on the two canines. "We need to get out of here before their backup arrives." Then Sly surged forward and the two canines charged to meet him. For a moment the twisting and turning of bodies when the three of them met held Felix enthralled. He almost couldn't tell where Sly ended and the canines began, except for the little streams of red that began to run from all of them, Sly included. Felix felt the urge to spring forward to his leader's aid. He swallowed that, and his growing nerves as he looked around to see the rest of his squad, aside from him, pressed even harder than Sly was. Sly was right. They needed to free the prisoners and get the hell out of there, and soon. Or they were all dead, even if the canine reinforcements didn't arrive. Felix turned away from the fray and sprinted toward the stacked walls of cages, and hopefully to the mechanism that would open them all and free his kin. He bounded away and focused ahead toward the stack of cages. Dozens of eyes looked out at him through the slats holding the prisoners back, eyes that glowed in both normal light and the infrared, but especially in the infrared, as Felix swore he could see claws extending on the paws of his kinsmen behind the bars, or at least those who still had their claws. But even those who had been declawed still held their teeth and their minds, and as he darted toward the right-hand side of the stack's lower level, half a dozen voices called out to him, "No, it's over on the left." Felix halted and turned his head that way, and blinked as his seeking eyes found it, a lever about the size of his head, sized for human hands. The lever was pushed up, and the cages were shut, so if he could pry it down... Felix grinned and turned towards the lever. He looked left as he charged toward it, and his grin faded. His fellow rangers were being overrun by the guardian canines, and now 2 of them were breaking off from the melee and were charging Felix's way. To intercept him before he could throw the lever and open the cages, no doubt. These were different than the Shih Tzu Felix had battled earlier, larger, obviously stronger, more aggressive, with larger teeth and eyes that gleamed with bloodlust. Felix could maybe take on one of them without help, but both at once? He was done, and then would follow his fellow rangers, and then all the prisoners in this charnel pit. So he turned and ran toward the lever. Behind him, he heard the growling of the guardian canines, their infrequent barking toward him. Both things getting closer, and all the while the lever seemed to stand still in its position, both on the wall and in life. But he was getting closer now, close enough that he felt like he ought to be able to reach out and take that lever if only he... Behind him, Felix felt as much as heard the Shih Tzus leap into the air to get him. Without thinking about it, he leapt up at the same time. His outstretched paws contacted the raised lever at the same time as a furred, growling and snapping creature landed on his back, and then everything became chaos. The sun was creeping up over the building tops to the east as Felix and the remains of his unit, along with the survivors from the cages within Mei Ling's, trooped away toward their planned muster point at the end of the city. Half of Felix's comrades who had ventured into the warehouse were gone, as were a third of the prisoners. They had fought valiantly to assist their rescuers after Felix had managed to hit the lever, but the canine reinforcements had arrived before they managed to make their retreat, and many of the prisoners had fallen in the fighting retreat that followed. Better to die that way on their feet than to be slaughtered while helpless, to be fed to an unsuspecting human population. But was it? Felix looked at Sly, loping to his left and carrying a pair of new wounds on his shoulder and his left cheek, but still managing to set the pace for the entire group, which left many struggling to keep up. "Do you really think they're unaware?" Sly blinked and looked at him, raising his one good eyebrow. "The humans," Felix said by way of explanation. "They have to know what it is they've been eating when they order Kung Pao chicken, or..." He refused to repeat what the canines had written over the door in the warehouse. "The only good cat is General Tso's chicken." "They have to know, don't they?" Sly frowned and shook his head. "I don't know." Felix returned the frown, feeling his claws extend again, unbidden. Sly must have noticed because he slowed, then came to a stop, turning toward Felix to face him fully. "Look, we know the canines cannot have been acting alone. The machinery alone speaks to that." He looked back in the direction of the now distant warehouse, the smoke from which could be seen plainly now in the growing light of the sky. "But we can't know how many are in on the plot. Probably most are not." He turned back to put a stern, very stern, look Felix's way. "Until we know for sure, we can't assume anything about the human population at large." "Can't we? What? No, we can't. It's a numbers game. How many of them, and how many of us? And how many guns against our claws?" That took the wind from Felix's sails, and after a minute he nodded. Sly made a smile that Felix assumed was meant to be reassuring. He reached out a paw to cuff Felix's shoulder. "Others made strikes tonight as well. Learned things we didn't know before. As we learn more, we'll know better who is friend and who is foe." Felix nodded, and Sly's expression, which had begun to go companionable, went back to being stern. "When the time comes for reprisals, we'll do it, and by that I mean us." That eyebrow rose again. "Rangers lead the way, right?" Felix nodded, showing his teeth. Sly returned the nod. Until then, be smart. Be steady. He grinned, and it was the grin of a hunter who sees wounded prey in the grass. The time is coming. Soon. Felix prayed to Bast that it would be so. Okay, successful raid. Your prisoners rescued. Took some casualties. But, whooped up on some Shih Tzus. Got a little whooped up on too. But a good raid, but maybe more to come. Or maybe not. I mean, obviously left the door open for future stories with these guys, and maybe we'll do them again in the future, who knows, but for now at least, that's where this one ends. Hope you liked it. I liked writing it. I also liked reading it, even though it's about cats. But they do make a yummy dishes out of them. Anyway, next week, when we come back for Story Saturday, we're doing story number 4 from Volume 2 of last year. And that is called Tesla Collection. Oh, yeah. This is about a guy who steals a Tesla. That's it. Crime story set in modern times involving a Tesla car. It's kind of fun. I'm not a big fan of Teslas, and this this story explores one of the reasons why. But anyway, so if you're liking these stories, if you like Volume 2, if you liked Volume 1, you should definitely go buy them, because that's why we write these stories, so people will buy books and make money for this publishing business. So we're all kinds of ways you can do that. The best way to go buy these books, or any of the books that I have, because I've got many, is michaelkingswood.com/store. That is my business entity, and we sell direct. You can get them in whatever format you want that are actually available, and it gets, if you get the ebook, there's a little service that I go through called Book Funnel that will send it directly to whatever device you like to read on. If you want print, we got print. If you want audiobook, some of them have audiobooks. Some of them don't. Part of the reasons why we do this podcast is to get audio recordings so that audiobooks can be sold. In fact, the audiobook for Volume 1 that we finished, a month ago now, has been created. It's up on Audible and Apple Books and a few other places. Don't have it up on my company store yet, just because of some logistics with that, but it will be soon. So if you enjoy all these stories and hearing me read them, you can go get that too. Life is good. Now, I can't get the audiobook from my business store yet, so you can go to the various retailers. michaelkingswood.com/books to read the number 2 will get you to a universal book link aggregator where you can click on the title that you like. It'll show you all the stores it's available on, and you can go to whatever store you want and pick it up, and everybody will be happy, and life is good. But maybe you don't want to buy a book, but you really love what we're doing around here, and you want to help contribute a little bit to keep the lights on. Well, a couple things you could do. One way to help is if you're not subscribed yet, hit the subscribe button, hit the likes, and if you're over on YouTube, I need to getting closer to the first threshold for monetization. Still a little ways there, but hey, that'd be cool. Rumble, you always are, sort of. And the podcast is just a podcast, so the way to monetize a podcast is by selling books. But anyway, you can do that. Make sure if you're not subscribed that you do. Other way you can do it is go over to subscribestar.com/Michael-Kingswood, where you can throw some bucks on a monthly basis. That'll be cool. And there's little donation links down below. So if you like what I'm doing, appreciate the work of this particular writer/artist and want to support, that's how you do it. Right. So I think that's all I've got for today. It's been a very interesting week in the Kingswood abode. A lot of ups and downs this week, but at least at this point, we're doing well. We're having fun. Oh, and we're really excited about the upcoming Kickstarter. Warfare Qualified, the military sci-fi novel that I've been working on for years now. we're going to run a campaign to get that out into the world. It is commencing on July 30th. And you should go and follow the campaign. If you go to the campaign page right now, michaelkingswood.com/ICNkick, you can go to the page, hit a little notification button, and it'll tell you as soon as the campaign goes live. And that'll be awesome. I, of course, will tell everybody as well. And, so you don't necessarily have to follow it now. It will help me if you do, though, because the more followers, the more visibility gets put on it before. Something about the way Kickstarter does their little visibility algorithms. Apparently, more people following it before launch equals more likely to get good visibility after launch. So go do that, and definitely back the campaign. There's going to be a very cool book. It's going to be probably it's going to be the longest I have written to date, which is going to be fun. And just because I'm doing a couple extra things with it, so we're not going to, though we're doing the campaign now, it won't be out till probably at this rate. Give myself a good buffer, probably not till spring. So just to make sure I don't overpromise and underdeliver, we'll do the other way around. So, but anyway, this way, the purpose of the campaign now, of course, is to get a little bit of money and also give myself a deadline to make sure I don't slack off on the final production pieces, and also to get cash for the final production pieces. A couple of things that I want / need to get done. And it's just fun. Keeps me in my routine, my battle rhythm of writing. Yeah. So go check that out. It's going to be cool. The Glimmervale 7 book will be out shortly to the backers of the campaign that was back in April, May. And that's going well as well. And so life is good around here. I am going to sign off now and go do businessy things, writing and stuff. So I will talk to you next week. Until then, don't do anything I wouldn't do.